Hey friend, I'm Sarah Magdalena and you're listening to the Daydreaming Wolves podcast, in which I talk about things I love like radical self-healing, feminism, relationships, activism, plant friends and magic. Sometimes it's just me sharing my thoughts, and sometimes I invite beautiful guest speakers for exciting interviews. You can subscribe on iTunes and check out my website daydreamingwolves.com, as well as sarahmagdalenalove.com for all things web design and online marketing. Hey everyone, I'm so happy and excited to have my new friend Ren on the show today. I came across her work because I more and more people in my Instagram world kept referring to her course, and I was like, these people are really magical and they're all taking this course, like there has to be oh, I need to find out more. And interestingly, I had come across her work last year, about half a year ago, but at the time I wasn't really ready, or it wasn't that open. I remember seeing the website and thinking oh, this sounds really cool, I'm gonna have to check that out another time. And then this spring it all came back to me and I signed up for her free course, which is such a beautiful, really, really generous offering. And I want to say also as a designer, it's so well made. We just had a chat about this. The content is amazing and the framework is amazing, and I love the thoughts that Ren is sharing and how magical she is, but it's also just really beautiful to look at and engage with. And so I'm in her 2-year apprenticeship now. I've just started it and it's been really beautiful so far. I've met really cool people in the community, and I love her approach because it's so, how do I say this? On one hand, it's really non-dogmatic. I feel really encouraged to explore my own insights and follow my instincts and really listen to my heart, which I feel in this world is so valuable. And at the same time, I'm getting these really beautiful tools and lots of input, and it feels like a really liberating process, if that makes sense. So that is my intro. I'm going to hand over to you now so you can tell us who you are, and maybe also tell us where you are in the world right now, what nature is around you.
Sure. Oh, thank you for that beautiful intro. It's so fun. I love hearing about people that you touch it the first time, and then it's you have to go back and sort of walk all the way back around and then come back to it again. If you're walking through the woods and you come upon the same interesting pattern twice, you're suddenly you're noticing it differently. So I love hearing these circuitous touch, walk back and return, this ebb and flow. And a lot of people probably in the program have the same experience, even though once they get into it, then there'll still be this moment of and then they touch something a little deeper and it's and we will ebb now.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden it's oh, I'm ready to dig back into it.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for that. My name is Ren Zatopek, and my site, renzatopek.com, is all about spirit work. So all of these courses that I'm offering, all of the information that I'm giving, and the practices and guided workings, it's all about spirit work, which I recognize when people arrive at my site, they're oh, that sounds good. What is that exactly? Is that witchcraft, but about spirits, or is this something else? Is it just a word for being spiritual? What is spirit work? Mm-hmm. And there's definitely a marketing conversation here where it's you chose a keyword that people are not necessarily looking for when you choose a word that people aren't as familiar with. But spirit work is basically this being in conversation and relationship with life, and in a sort of animist view where everything can be experienced as alive. Our own spirit, our soul, things around us, plants around us. Yes, the nature where I live, which is part of your question. Mm-hmm. So that is who I am and what I'm doing. I'm an online spirit work teacher, and I live in Los Angeles, which is still bizarre to me, even though I've been here over a decade now. Somehow that happened. I grew up in Texas, deep in the nature, deep in forests and thunderstorms and massive skies and fields that are just crazy with wind and all of that intense energy that was in that land. And then moving to Los Angeles, the nature here is unnaturally diverse, because I could describe California and give you the oh, California's but I live in Los Angeles. I live in the valley, And it is unnaturally and yet in its own way kind of beautifully diverse. It's like the people. Like there's a mixture of folks and they brought all their plants from all over the world. Pretty much any plant that loves sun, somebody is growing it here. There are, ethical questions about invasive species constantly, and yet that is the environment. There's just, tons and tons. You just drive down the boulevard and it's like trees from around the world. Nothing that was ever here, 200 years ago is now everywhere. Even some of the trees here, like jacaranda, is this beautiful tree that multiple times a year is covered in purple, like lavender blossoms. And just I have one out in front of my house, and like my whole front yard is just purple flowers certain times of year. But it's like just one of these things that we have our like jacaranda season, and it's like, Asian ornamental pear season, and all these things that are just, so that's kind of LA nature, is that it's sunny, and anything that loves sun, really bright, intense sun, is happy here as far as plants. And I guess same for people, any people that love really intense sun, and that kind of fits actually the spirit of place, because it's all about the spotlight and Hollywood and shining lights on things.
Yeah, interesting. That's really interesting. How did you come to live in LA?
I came out here for school. Like, I don't think that I would have chosen it, except that I wanted to get a writing degree, but I was really interested in film. So I got a film writing degree, and that's what they have here in LA. You can get those here.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Specialized.
Yeah, cool. That's beautiful. So I listened to another podcast interview that you were on, and so I already know a little bit about your backstory in terms of becoming magic, or like magic finding you. But can you tell our listeners a little bit more about what an interesting child you were and how you became so magical?
Yes. Yeah, it's funny because I think somewhere on my site I mentioned the word free spirit. I use that one a lot because free spirit was like, one of the nicer ways to put, like, what a weird kid. Free spirited, she's very free spirited. And I was, like, as a kid, I was constantly, like, talking to things. I was, like I said, I already lived in Texas. I had this strong relationship with the weather. I was just talking to the sky and constantly, like, doing little spells. I don't know where I picked up all of this, but it's like, these berries are my potion, and just stuff out of the front yard, this mud pie is medicine, painting on the walls, just that kind of kid, like head in the clouds. And I was really prone to trance. So it's like if we're on a long car ride, then I am just like, entire movies going through my head, like intense stories, tons of invisible friends and relationships with the things around me. The first time we moved houses, I was like, but I have a relationship with this house. This house has a name. Oh, walls. Like, it was such a big deal to somehow recognize this kind of like shift in place when I had a relationship with the place as if it was a person, like we're leaving a family member. And then as childhood ends, because in childhood everybody's a little bit like that. I mean, not all kids, but everybody's a little bit like talking to stuff and imaginary friends. That's not weird. And then you get a little older and most people kind of grow out of that. And I just didn't. And it moved from this sort of like in-between phase where you're like, oh, I'm still feeling magical. I'm still talking to the weather and the weather's talking back to me. What do I do with that? And that ebb and flow, pushing it away a little bit. I think on the other podcast I described it as like, I'm a writer. That's what I am. I'm not a witch. I'm a writer. My other W word. And then kind of coming back around to, oh, no, that might actually be witchery. And researching that, when most people kind of go through the phase of pushing it away, I went through the phase of like devouring every book I could find and just filling myself with information and training so that now I'm happy to say as an adult I'm actually better at magic than I was as a kid, where most people have this experience of like, I'm trying to get back to what I'm pretty sure I could do as a kid. So just lucky in that I didn't take a long break. And there's nothing wrong with taking a long break. I think a lot of people, in a way, have a more healthy relationship with it because they took a couple decades off and then had to like find their desire for it. And so like it was different. By the time they come back to it, like they really want it. They have a love for it. Whereas I spent years as a late teenager, early 20s, overwhelmed by it. Having wonderful experiences, but confused about it all the time. And what's going on with me? Am I crazy? Like all that kind of stuff. I was having all of the experiences, and on the one hand, I couldn't keep my hands off of it. And on the other hand, just not having guidance other than trying to like chew through books and find things that were going to talk about my experience. And at least, even though these books may exist, for me, when I was getting started, a lot of what I was reading wasn't necessarily confirming the spirit work side of what I was doing. I was looking more at books about, calling the quarters and celebrating the Sabbats and, making magical recipes. And I hadn't really found the material right off the bat that was confirming like, yes, and talking to things and creating change and candles that light themselves and all this other stuff that I was experiencing. So it was beautiful when I came into community and works that started sort of confirming that.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So magical journey.
Yeah, I loved some of the concepts that you introduced in your introductory course as well, because I was such a dreamy child too, and I was constantly taught like Sarah should really engage more in class. Like she has a habit of daydreaming. And I
Daydreaming Wolves.
Yes, exactly. And I love the like how you introduced us to trance is really interesting, because I think I've always had this really intense longing for like extraordinary experiences and just going deeper. I'm also a Scorpio, so like that's just my thing. And I think as teenagers in my early 20s, I just explored ways of creating these experiences that were not as sustainable, and I'm now all about like the trippy stuff that is more sustainable. So yeah, I totally hear you on that. Could you maybe expand a little bit more? You kind of already said a little bit about this, but on your website it also says that you think of yourself as a traditional spirit worker. Can you and names are hard and so powerful at the same time, aren't they? Like, was that a journey for you to come up with this term, or like how do you feel about it now?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the way that I define traditional spirit worker is we're teaching spirit work, and anybody can do spirit work, moving in, encountering our spirit, developing that relationship, and that's just spirit work. And then there's a place for modern spirit work where you're kind of working with, your environment around you and technology and encountering things in your world that are current. And then traditional spirit work, most people then picture is like, well, that's going to be the counterpoint to modern. Like it's old-timey spirit work, like spirit work that draws upon everything the ancestors knew. But what the ancestors knew was that they drew upon themselves, that they had to have the dreams and the visions come out of them. They didn't have the library and the internet to go gather, well, how do I do spirit work? Yeah. So traditional, in part, means sourcing from within yourself and from within the voices within, contacting your own ancestors, getting in touch with what they're bringing. And then traditional is taking what they've said with a grain of salt and saying, is that right for me right now? Instead of turning it into religion where you get worshipful and, oh, the ancestors said it, therefore this is what I am called to do and I must. And then the other piece that makes spirit work traditional to me is when it becomes in service of a community.
Yeah.
That's the big difference. Spirit work, the traditional spirit worker was somebody who served a community in some way through teaching, through healing, through offering something. And we kind of picture that then as like the modern professional witch or tarot reader or teacher. But as long as it's a community, so to me, serving, not serving, bow down serving, but assisting, offering help, being in relationship with the ancestors, that's a community. So maybe it's something nobody knows that you do, but you have this relationship of assisting ancestors, of helping people pass over, of helping spirits that get lost, and that's the community you serve, and now your role is traditional. It has to do with this assisting of community, as opposed to like, I'm just working on myself, which is so important too, and kind of happens before necessarily moving into service, but at some point it's like, and I've done all this work on myself, and now what do I do with it? And so for a lot of people that just turns into the next thing you do, is you start sourcing other people's questions. You're like, I actually worked on a lot of my questions. I spent a decade getting every question out of me, and now it's like other people's questions become beautiful, and it just sort of shifts, and you kind of step into that more traditional role.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Just like, yes. Yeah.
And I feel like herbalists do this too, right? Because it's like you start with like, I need healing. I'm going to learn about plants. I'm going to learn about plants. I'm going to try all the plants. Oh, I'm going to train in plants. And then all of a sudden it just turns into this like, now I've done all this stuff with plants. Well, what do I do? And you evolve into the like, I'm going to teach people about plants. I'm going to share plants. I'm going to connect people with plants. I'm going to serve the plant community by helping people respect them, help people by,
Yeah, I totally feel the same. I started studying herbalism almost 2 years ago, and I feel like it's never been my intention to become like a community herbalist or anything like that, but you just can't help but share the plants because they're so magical. And I think that is part of having an actual relationship with nature and with the specific plants that you're working with to really ask them like how can I support you, and they just want to be shared. They want their magic to be known, I think.
Everybody wants a little respect, a little recognition.
Exactly. Totally.
The first time my aloe bloomed, it was like, look at me. I took 3 years to make this incredible flower, like, please take a photo.
Yes.
Look at my hat.
Sing to me, like touch my petals and like make it last, the experience. Yeah, totally. I also experience your work as very accessible because like you said, you don't really center people having specific tools so much, which I really love. And I really love the tools. I have a small collection of crystals that I'm totally in love with, and I'm just looking over at my little altar of herbs here. But I just find that there's very little assumptions in your work, which I really love. And that makes me feel like people of all kinds of backgrounds and genders and sexual orientations and locations and can be a part of this, which is really beautiful. Just as a side note, that's great.
I'm actually really excited about that piece because someone who's done a lot of different training and moved in a lot of different groups, and I've been in some really open, beautiful groups as well, but there's often an experience of like, oh, I'm working with these folks and our focus is on the Celtic pantheon and Celtic mythology and Celtic magic, and you fall in love with these people and you're learning and you're doing great things, and then all of a sudden you feel this like, oh, but I want to learn about Norse mythology, and it's like, well, then it's time to move on from that community and find new people. And so building something where people are, free to come and go, so that there's not this kind of like expectation that you're going to stay and be a part and support the community. You're allowed to kind of come and do this ebb and flow and dance in and out of all the things you want to explore, but that it can be stable because there is no expectation that everybody has the same thing that they're following or working on. And like you said, same with gender and sexual orientation. There's no constant like, and here's the goddess and god, it must be binary. It's like, no, it's whatever. I'll just keep everything a little bit more general so that people can put in what they're working with, and then we can all play together and share without having to have someone eventually be like, well, I thought I was okay with it being binary and now I'm really not feeling that and I have to go find a new community again.
Yeah, that would be heartbreaking. Yeah, totally. I was wondering if you might be up for sharing some of your favorite regular practices with us. I know that you already have, I know that you also have a background in bodywork, which is really interesting and kind of made so much sense to me when I first heard about this, because I think there's so much magic to be experienced in the exchange, the physical exchange with another person and that kind of energy. And I'm a body worker too. I've trained in Thai yoga, massage, and some other practices, and they are so important to me. I love bringing magic into that, and I love bringing plants in as well. So maybe tell us a little bit about what you love doing.
Ooh, sign me up for one of those. I'll take the Thai yoga plant magic massage. So as far as favorite practices, my regular kind of daily things that I do. One thing I really love that when I first started magic was so funny. As a typical kid, I was like, I don't care about this at all. But now as an adult, I love spiritual hygiene. Like, I just love like cleansing, grounding, just like, getting into my skin, feeling my thresholds, just like not, and I call it hygiene because I like to use this metaphor with folks because sometimes spiritual cleansing can be so otherworldly that we don't always treat it with the kind of, what's the word, like rational thinking that we would do with regular hygiene where it's like, how many times should I wash my hands? It's like, well, a couple, but not all day long, every day. Like they're not meant to be perfectly sanitized. You can scrub yourself raw, and this is true with spirit stuff too. So I just use hygiene as the metaphor for like take a shower, wash your hair occasionally. We talked about this before we got on the show today too. Wash your hair occasionally. You don't need to do it 4 times a day. That gets a little much. And yet sometimes when people are learning spiritual cleansing or protection, that's totally the way it gets talked about. Like, make sure you've made your pink bubble and that you're in it all day long when you're around negative energy. And for me, it's just kind of like, if I get mud splattered, I'm going to take a shower later. It's cool. Like dealing with people is messy and I want to be in contact and feel it kind of like with plants. You want to be in the garden. Like, I'm going to go get my hands dirty. And it's the same kind of with Bodywork. It's like if I walked into Bodywork wearing my like pink shield, I'm going to make sure I don't pick anything up, off of this person. It's like, no, I'm going to go in there and we're going to like get messy. I'm going to be up to my elbows in grease and experience of their body and sharing and usually their feelings, it's overflowing. It's super just like wonderful messy work. This is the Scorpio thing too. Scorpio moon's like, let me touch it. Gross. Can I touch it? And just like this willing, and it's funny actually in Bodywork school, I don't know if you experienced this, but there's a lot of people that come in, they're like, oh, this work seems really beautiful. And then the first time they got their hands on a real stank foot, they're just like, I'm out. But then some of us are like, wow, feet. Oh, all the different kinds of feet, different toes. Oh, this is amazing. It's totally the Scorpio moon thing, which is like, oh, I just love like digging in and experiencing and being with people through all of the sensations of kind of coming into their body. And bodywork and trance work is really so right there because how many times like you have somebody in a massage and they are just like in a totally altered state. They're like, I don't know where I was. I'm somehow in my body more than I've been all day, and yet I'm out of my mind. I'm so like relaxed and noodly. And so that kind of flowed one into the other as well. And that is one of my daily practices. I love doing body work for myself, getting the tennis ball under my feet and just standing there and experiencing my own gnarly toes and melting over things. Which is funny because I actually have a really difficult body. I have a neurological disability and a lot of challenges physically, which is often people's story when they're like, and how did you become a body worker? It's like, well, my body was jacked. So of course I went to bodywork school. We just said this with plants. I went in to kind of heal myself, and then it turned out it turns around and you start offering it to other people. And yet for me, that kind of willingness to stay in touch with what part of me is most difficult, which for me is my health, is definitely part of my daily practice. It's really useful. And I would say that was not my practice when I was a teenager. It was much more like, how can I get like out of my mind crazy with whatever I can. Tell me more about astral projection, not tell me more about getting into my body. Are we getting old now that it's like, oh, I can't wait to get into my body later?
Yes. Embodiment, like it's so trippy. I was searching outside of my body for such a long time, but it's all in here. It really is. And that was one of my inspirations for the program that you're in now, this apprenticeship, is it's sort of like, well, if we're going to have this longer program and it's going to be general in the sense that people can really hang with it no matter what cultures or experiences or paradigms or metaphors or definitions they want to use, they're going to be able to hang out in this work. I was like, what do we have in common? We have bodies, we're human, we live, we die. These are the things that everybody really can touch, and yet that's part of what makes the work so potent and terrifying. It's like, oh, dying, that is like an actual thing we're all going to do that we can talk about, and yet of all the things that people are like, I don't
maybe not. That's not. Unless you're talking about like fantasy afterlife. Oh yeah, but no, you're talking about like dying in the body. Oh, and yet
Yeah.
there's so much real magic in that. And of course, Scorpio over here is nodding at me like, oh yeah,
Yes, yes.
let's do that. I can't wait for that meditation.
Yes. Yeah, and like becoming Earth again and all of that. Yeah. I think that Scorpios, I want to have a little bit of Scorpio pride here because I think that there's a lot of Scorpio shame as well. You know? Where people are like, oh, you're so intense. Be really careful when you date a Scorpio kind of thing. But I think Scorpios are really great at closure and celebrating the small death and being really real about like what life and death is, and yeah, not shying away from that. So high five for us. Yes.
And it's funny because we had in the intro course the lesson on desire for intensity as one of the pitfalls and things that can get out of balance in our practice. And that's definitely like a Scorpio, I'm looking at you, desire for intensity. And yet there is something about that that's also the motivation for doing something like spirit work. When you have someone of any astrological flavor that's sort of like, I just can't keep my hands off of deeper work. Whenever I hit like a level, I'm like, ooh, this is deep. And it's like, but could I go deeper? Those are the people that, want to come into community where they can have an experience of just like, and what's next? And what's next? And what's next? And to not run out of depths because they've kind of hit the bottom of the pool and they're like, oh, take me to the ocean.
Yeah, totally. This is so nice.
Yay, I'm having fun. I was like, did I get, regular practices. I was like moving back around. So spiritual hygiene, I love doing body work with myself. I love having a weekly kind of family dinner with my spirits. So there was a time when it was all like, I just kind of constantly was like talking with all of them and chattering and being intense and in this kind of more constant relationship. But now, as I've grown, I've really learned to kind of like let it go, give myself space, to really be alone with myself, including not all of the chatter inside, and then to really set space each week to sit down at the altar, put something tasty out to eat, and just call in everybody and like, let's have the full gathering. Because a lot of times in the week, I'm working with people or I'm working on the course, and that requires me to work with specific spirits that are co-writing something with me, or we're creating a certain thing, or answering a question a certain way. But at the end of the week, it's like I've got all these other friends, and maybe I haven't called them in a couple months. So it's so good to just kind of create that space to actually call everybody in and connect. Like, you make so many different relationships with spirits over the years when you do this work. And there was a time, even when I was in my 20s, where it was like I had met so many different spirits that I just started to keep a list. I was like, these are the names. These are all the different realms I've been and the names that I have. And of course, now as a grown up, I'm like, yeah, if you have to have a list, like maybe you're not as close of friends as you think. And yet, when you have the list, there's also this like, well, but how are we going to become friends unless I invite them back over for tea regularly? So I can just build this ongoing relationship. So I do my weekly family dinners. I have an ancestor altar that sits in the back of my piano. I have a cat, so candles are not as cool anymore. He's very like one of those like, let me knock everything off. Let me help you by putting everything on the floor cats. And so I actually just play music for them. I love doing that. Just like, instead of offering fire, I just give voice and we connect that way. I just play. I love playing like nocturnes where all your deep feelings are stirred, and that kind of beauty just really helps me stay connected with their presence. And then right now it's just a lot of writing. Writing is spirit work of all things, especially when you're trying to write about spirit work and you've got that weird meta, like staring into two mirrors facing each other into infinity, where you're like, I'm writing about writing about the thing I'm doing to write about this.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I really love your writing, both in your emails and in the course, and I really wish for everyone to experience that too sometime. Can you do you have a favorite plant friend that is also part of your life at the moment?
Yes, I do. I have one plant friend that has an amazing story as far as how we met. First date with this plant friend. Black sage, California black sage, Salvia mellifera. I was like, I'm glad I remembered that because that is not what I normally call that plant. But California black sage. I had just moved to LA and I was out of school and was trying to kind of find my way in this landscape because I was so used to living like farm country that it was really challenging for my body and for my spirit to be in such a chaotic environment with so much human density. And I decided, I was like, what I need, even though at the time I was like, there's no yard, there's just like the apartment concrete box patio. I was like, but I need plants. That's what I need. I need green, something just to remind me how to like root and touch the sky. So I go to a farmer's market and there's a stand with all the different herbs, and I was like very in my head like the ones I knew because I was not experienced with herbalism. And I was like, I don't know, chamomile. That seems nice. It's going to fry in the sun, but I'm like, chamomile, that sounds nice. Lemon balm, that smells good. So I'm picking up a few. And this guy comes out from behind the stand. This is his stand. He's wearing a black shirt and a sizable pentacle, like a big like bling pentacle, and he looks at me and I am wearing scrubs because I've been working at a medical office doing body work. I'm like, I'm not wearing my bling pentacle. And he looks at me and he says, I see you, sister. This one's for you. Hands me California black sage. And I'm just like, what? And he said, this one's for you. And I was like, oh, it's really nice. I guess I can find another dollar. And he's like, no, I don't want your money. This one is for you. You're going to work with this one. And I was like, who are you, mysterious, blinged out mystery magic man? And I totally am embarrassed because in that moment I kind of like shied away and was like, okay. And I wandered off. And after a week of processing what had happened and encountering this incredible spirit that he'd introduced me to, I was like, I'm going to go back and find him this week. And I'm going to come back and be like, hey, today I'm wearing my giant pentacle and like, let's be friends. You're amazing. And I go back and dude is gone. And I'm like asking other stands, I'm like, was there an herb guy here last week? And they're like, I don't know. We're usually kind of the same crowd. I'm like, no, last week there was a guy, black shirt. And they were just like, I don't know, lady. So one of those bizarro. So this is how black sage came into my life. Wow. And then black sage in a pot is a plant that'll live like a couple of years usually. That was 12 years ago. My potted black sage is still alive. It blooms several times a year. It's had babies that I've been able to give to friends. But I did have a really challenging conversation with it recently, which is that I'm kind of on the cusp of thinking about leaving LA at some point, getting out, living in nature again. And I realized, I was like, California black sage, you love LA. This is your land. If I go move to a wet, cool forest somewhere, are you coming with me? Yeah. And it was like, no. Oh. It was like, this is where I live, and this is our space and time where we've connected, and you will go and create a new ally there that's going to root you into that land. But attached me, I was like, going back to childhood, Ren doesn't want to leave house. Yeah. Special friend with plant. And funny too, because, over the years, this was a plant that I worked with in spirit work as well. I used it not just with clients as far as like the plant material, but it was a plant that I ingested small pieces of daily. I laid it into my shoes, and it really integrated with my spirit. It became like you have two heads. It's like, this is my black sage head that can come out of my mouth in like weird, hidden, mystical ways. And it performed all this different kind of work with me. And so realizing that like almost like I was going to lose a limb. And in the sense of like, our spirits are so integrated now. I was like, what? Are you serious? But it was interesting just as a plant to have that kind of love and kinship, but they didn't have the kind of like human attachment griefy thing that I was doing where it was like, no.
You should make an essence of it that you can take with you and to kind of help you transition maybe. That would be nice. Yeah, I do that too in bodywork. I love that you just said that, how we ingest or like, work with the plant in different ways. I do that with mugwort and chamomile a lot, where like I will put on a mugwort oil and have some mugwort tea and like have a little bit of tincture of it as well. And then really connecting with that in bodywork. Like sometimes I feel, chamomile is so great for like a really sunny, light massage where you just want your touch to feel like a July morning, and like a really soft kind of white cotton feeling, and it's so nice to because I feel like it really centers and clears our energy. Like we can be so all over the place and messy as humans, and plants really are like creating that framework and support to be in the energy that the person needs at the time, which is really that's great. Yeah. Before we close, do you maybe want to tell us a little bit more about what your vision for the apprenticeship is? I'm kind of, I've just started and I'm so excited, and I love everything that you said about both the accessibility and the framework that you created, and that it kind of resembles the human experience of like being a baby and then, becoming older and eventually dying. So yeah, can you share a little bit more about like what your vision for that is? And yeah.
Sure, and it becomes this delicious teaser for you because it's like coming up next in your world. Yeah, the apprenticeship, my vision, and we talked about several pieces of this, is just creating something that can provide the tools that allow spirit work to happen in a really natural, safe, which is, I think there's a word where it's sort of like, it's not safe, like tripping out and altering your state of consciousness and talking with everything around you. But there is a way to do it that is safer, that keeps us from really falling into dogmatic beliefs and getting caught up in really rigid types of thinking. I listened to one of your shows recently where you guys were talking about like the power of positivity and how that can really be a detrimental like form of dogma where we're just so caught up in like everything needs to be positive. And so by moving it into the context of a human life, we kind of have all the material we need if we're willing to look at our life, which for daydreamers, this becomes really valuable. If we're willing to look at our life tells us not everything is positive. We are going to have difficult experiences. In fact, we've had them. When we look at life, most of the things that we normally would be trying to pick up out of some occult tome, like, well, we have to learn about, the initiatory gateway, and it's like, ooh, it's in your life. This is the original textbook, all of these different gateways and thresholds, and the fact that everybody walks a different path, the fact that we're all connected and yet we're kind of alone doing our own thing, the fact that we have this rhythm in our heart, like we can move even into our body and discover the trance inside of us, looking for that repetition. We can listen to our own pulse, find these things inside, and we take it outward and can be traditional and use a drum, but then we have this drum inside of us, so kind of finding everything we need on the inside is a big part of it. Moving through the phases of life, it's funny because one thing I repeatedly do as we encounter each phase is we kind of look at the mystical counterpart. So, okay, we learned all of this from actually being a baby, but the course isn't about being a baby. The course is about what is a baby spirit worker, where we're trying to play with our voice, and we tend to cry a lot. And trying to figure out how can I be in a better relationship with all the emotion that's coming up as I try to become somebody who's capable of going deeper and doing transformative work. We shift into childhood, and it's like, it's not actually about being a kid again, but what did kids know about spirit? Well, they knew about imagination, they knew how to visualize, they knew how to speak their mind, they knew how to say no if they didn't like something and put their foot down and just be really kind of simple about things. And their relationships, they knew how to make friends in a really open, kind of crazy, like, hey, my name's so-and-so, now we're besties, let's do this kind of way. And moving through all of that, and then moving into teenagerhood, betweenhood, it's this sort of I'm trying to figure out who I am and what I'm doing. And we see spirit workers where they're like, am I a witch, or am I a this, or am I this, or the same question.
Oh, Ren, you cut out a tiny bit. Can we maybe turn the video off and then keep talking? So I think that would be better for the quality.
Yeah, I lost your video as well, so should we turn off the... Okay.
Yeah, great. And then just keep telling us more.
Okay.
Awesome.
Where did it first start glitching? And childhood?
No. As a teenager, not too far
Okay.
in. So as a teenager, you were saying like how we play with these different identities and like, am I a
Mhm.
witch or what am I? And yeah, so carry
Okay.
on, please. Thank you.
Yeah. So then in betweenhood, in this teenager between phase, there's this search for who am I and rebellion and kind of breaking out of everything that was our prior pattern, kind of separating ourselves out from our caregivers, finding our own way, but in a sort of beautifully narcissistic way where it really is centered on self.
Yeah.
Who am I? What is my soul? What can I do in the world? How can I prove myself? And embracing that as a natural part of this sort of exploration of spirit work, that we're going to have that point where it's really self-centered, it's really focused on who am I and what am I doing.
Yeah.
And yet, a lot of people get hung at that point in the work. And the beautiful thing about life is it tells us you go through that, and then there's a next place to go. We get to become adults where we start to have that sense of who we are and what we're doing, and then to see all of that crash down.
Yeah.
That's really why we call that one the adult awakenings. It's that experience of where you build something up, and that first time you really realize it's not all as solid as you wanted it to be, that life has things that come up and that go away, has problems, has difficulties, has wounds, has things that don't heal easily, and that willingness to actually touch what's painful and difficult and all of our expectations shattering. We talk a lot about resistance in that aspect of the course, in that phase. And adulthood kind of teaches us how to just keep walking when you're lost in the woods.
Yeah.
That adulthood is so much about like, am I an adult yet?
Yeah.
Is this what it is? Just kind of being confused about what I'm supposed to be doing and having all these like ideals as a teenager that then kind of crumble into my actual life and that bewildering sensation. And yet there's a strength that comes out of it. But then we have a lot of folks that in spirit work get hung in that phase of just constantly being the wounded healer, constantly sourcing all of their trauma to fuel their work. But the beautiful thing about life is it teaches us move forward. There's a next phase where we become more like parents. We learn to take responsibility for these different things and to start creating life, to create meaning, where we kind of watched it all crumble in adulthood and parenthood. It's like, wait, meaning is something I can make. If I can't find it from outside of me, then I'll start building it. I'll start giving birth to spirits. I'll write the thing I've been wanting to write. I'll create the business I've been wanting to create. And then all the difficulties that come with taking responsibility for spirits and building things, which is all relevant types of spirit work. And then even then we get stuck. Then now I'm a perpetual like caregiver. So we again are like, move it on, experience elderhood, that place where you really start to synthesize and figure out how to make everything a lot easier. And on into death. We do phase 7. We talk about dying and ancestral work. And then into phase 8, where people are like, what could that even possibly be? What's beyond death? And yet that is what we do in the very last phase, which is really about the kind of spirit work that sort of stretches us outside of life, but in a way that still bridges it back in, the sort of like the spirits that connect the sort of outer other world and humanity, having encounters with hidden spirits doing other world work, and yet seeing the other world as the kind of roots and foundation of life, and being able to encounter it with that understanding because we've just walked through this whole path exploring life. So it doesn't become this just like, wow, what a trip. It's like, that's kind of the root of this, and now I see how that manifests in the world. And so the vision for the course is really just that, using the human life as the textbook for learning all kinds of different mystical and magical lessons and principles and techniques, and moving people as well from working in their inner realm, doing, we call it guided meditations a lot of time, but we're talking about guided imaginations where someone tells you a story and you picture it in your head and you have a great experience. And then moving that into, well, what if I moved it from my head into my body and I had a really like emotional, intense physical experience? And then moving that into, what if I actually had an experience that was a little bit like, am I still in my body, that started to seem like I was encountering something outside of myself. Like I'd really stretched to my edge and filled my space where I'm primary and started encountering things outside of me that were more beyond my control, that required me to have a different relationship. And then even beyond that, becoming someone who can work and create change in the world. Because a lot of times it can be tricky. We were just having this conversation. With the intro course, there's a Facebook group. So we're talking about different stuff that's going on, and someone was asking, like, you talk about how in the inner realm and the imaginary work that's a wonderful place to start, where there's a lot of people that either they feel like that's the only thing that exists, they can't get beyond that, there is no beyond, or they think everything they're doing is beyond, and there's shame around the idea that it would be imaginary. But that's somehow like, oh, well, it can't be imaginary, then it's not witchcraft. If you're just working inside of yourself, how lame is that?
That's interesting.
But by working from one end of that spectrum to the other, from within to without, we get a real clear sense of what is within, what is without, so we can feel the difference in our work and not have shame about either one. Whether I'm not willing to think there's anything outside of me, we can start to be like, well, what if there is, and play with that? And I'm not willing to work inside of me because I'm just making it all up, and that's what I'm afraid people will accuse me of. And getting familiar with that, which means in the long run, we're able to do work where we can feel the difference.
Sorry. Oh God, I'm so excited for the rest of the program. So excited. Thank you. That's amazing. Can you maybe tell us where people can find you if they want to know more about the program, or, which I would really recommend they want to sign up for the free introduction, which is really not the kind of free introduction you would expect. It is really, really rich, and there's so much to dig into. It's really beautifully made, and you should totally check it out. Please tell us where.
Wow, thank you. My website is at renzatopek.com, which is my name, and hopefully you will have that spelled in the show notes for folks, so I won't do but renzatopek.com is my site. There's a page on there that says Learn Spirit Work, and big, shiny, gold, caramel, tasty buttons that say, go to the intro course, enroll, go forth, it is free. It was the first offering that I made, this intro course, the first time I sat down in front of the camera. And even though I have this fantasy of going back to it and, tightening up certain parts or adding in certain details or just cleaning up some of the camera work, there's another part of me that looks at that and just feels this kind of overwhelming, looking at your child self, look at baby, and it wasn't that long ago, but I'm look at baby me, so new in front of the camera, aren't you adorable? I always have a soft spot for this version, this.
I think you should leave it as it is. It's amazing. Thank you. Sorry, oh God, I have the coughs. Thank you so much for everything, for sharing that, for creating this beautiful course, and for telling us about your practices and where you're coming from today. I really look forward to sharing this episode with everyone, and I'm going to put everything in the show notes so people don't have to remember necessarily. And just thank you so much. Thank you.
You are so welcome, Sarah. It's been wonderful talking to you today. I'm laughing that you're kind of coughing and sniffling because I'm looking at this beautiful profile photo of her where there's flowers under her nose. And I'm just that's so beautiful. I can see why you're sniffling. You've got all those flowers up under your nose. Yes, but thank you so much for having me here today. It's so wonderful to get to know you better. I'm loving these little friendship interviews, getting in with people. And thank you for sharing the work. I look forward to having some more folks come gather around the fire and talk spirit work with us and share their interesting questions. There's always that selfish motivation, yes, more questions, delicious. More perspectives, that helps all of us.
That's totally true. Yes. Thank you. See you soon. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Bye.